the 24th of November. Thank you. And we now come to the 10-minute rule bill. Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to require the Chancellor of the Exchequer to report to Parliament on the likely effects of increasing in line with inflation the income threshold for the high income child benefit charge, and of determining that threshold by reference to household income instead of individual income. Mr Deputy Speaker, thanks again to the House for allowing me to present this 10-minute rule bill and motion. I will attempt to be succinct in the time scale that most members of the House will have an understanding of why I, and indeed the Democratic Unionist Party and others as a party, seek to present this bill today, and that is the interest of fairness. Fairness is always critical, always key to anything that I do. The charge is equal to 1% of a family's child benefit for every £100 of income. That is over £50,000 each year. And if an individual's income is over £60,000, the charge will equal the total amount of the child benefit. That is how it worked out, indeed how it has been worked out since introduction since January 2013, with not one single change. The fact that the threshold for high-income child benefit charge has remained unchanged for 10 years now is certainly incredible and not unusual when it comes to government threshold. Even the standard personal allowance for tax has risen by almost a third from 2013 to the personal allowance in 2023 during the same period. In the interest of fairness, it is noted this level of income tax have been frozen in cash terms since 21-22, and government policy that will remain frozen up to and including 27-28. For a working family in tandem with the child benefit freeze find themselves even harder pressed to pay the bills. The question of why we are now faced with an immovable child benefit threshold is difficult when we consider that literally every other rate has fluctuated within that time span. The cost of diesel has, for people to get to work is up by 30p a litre, well over 20%, while those who invested in electric cars have seen the price of electricity consumption increase from an average of £577 in 2013 with to a price cap of £2,500. Increases are not limited to those essentials. Using the Consumer Prices Index measure of inflation, the tremendous staff in the library have worked out that the average prices in the UK rose by 25.9% from tax year 2013-14 to 22-23. Let's just take a moment, Mr Deputy Speaker. That's an increase of 25%. Substantial, and while wages have not increased at the same time, wages may well have increased, yet the family is worse off in paying for precisely the same bills that cost 25% more. This in turn will mean that the wage increase may preclude a child benefit claim, and yet it is clear that for working families, child benefit is more necessary than ever before. The question that Treasury will be working out is what would thresholds be if they were uprated with inflation. As the members of the Treasury Cabinet are aware, the usual practice is that income tax thresholds are uprated based on the annual inflation rate of CPI in the September prior to the start of the coming tax year. For example, CPI inflation in September 22 for tax year 23-24. Just to give some examples, I think it's good to illustrate it with such. Based on this in practice, the thresholds, if they've been uprated in line with CPI inflation, would be the lower threshold of 50,000 2013-14 would be 62,644 and 23-24. The upper threshold of 60,000 2013-14 would be 75,173 and 23-24. That's what they should be. They're not, and that's why this 10-minute rule motion is here today. That is substantially different to where we find ourselves, and that is one of the reasons for the bill today and why the 10-minute rule motions were brought forward. Government are aware of the issue. Indeed, I know the Minister and I have spoken about this before, always very generous, the Minister, in her replies, perhaps not with the answers I was hoping for, and hence the reason why our 10-minute rule bill is here today. I've raised this during budget debates and other debates in Westminster Hall, and the Minister was quick to highlight that the charge affects a small proportion of child benefit claimants, namely those who have relatively high incomes. I think we've established that this threshold is nowhere near the same rate someone was allowed to earn when it was designed in 2013. So again, the question is, government, I believe, must answer the question of whether this is a stealth tax on the working middle class, who cannot be classified as rich by any stretch of the imagination, or whether it is to ensure that those in need of help don't get it. The rationale behind applying child benefit threshold has been terribly blurred by the refusal to uplift the threshold in line with inflation, or indeed even common cause and common sense. The Minister has previously responded to me that in 2019-2020 only about 373,000 individuals in the UK declared an HICBC liability. However, the vast majority of those 373,000 individuals have incomes above the UK higher rate tax threshold of £50,270, and the inference, Mr Deputy Speaker, is of course that they are rich and they don't need help, which is quite untrue. With an increase of 25% CPI, this argument doesn't carry the weight for the family who paid £98.15 for 25 hours of childcare in 2013 and who now pay £285.31 per week. That's the inflation, that's the CPI, that's a problem. And if they earn £50,000, they certainly don't get child tax credit to help them. These people are in ordinary jobs, trying their best to make their mortgage payments, heat their home, educate their children, and not one penny from government over this child benefit. Since HICBC has been introduced, HMRC has also carried out compliance checks on those who either did not register for self-assessment to pay the charge or paid the incorrect amount on their self-assessment tax return. We started off with a few thousand people over the threshold. The number escalated to 61,881 checks on those not registered for self-assessment and 63,713 for those who have returned the incorrect amount in 2019 before the pandemic. This is not a few families, and the scale of the compliance checks illustrates the difference between the introduction of charge in 2013 and how many people are now expected to fill out a self-assessment form without training or guidance, or perhaps even paying for an accountant to get it right for them in fear of getting a fine or a black mark. Mr Deputy Speaker, the bill also highlights the inconsistency of the fact that a single income home has a threshold of around £50,000, and yet a dual income household could be earning £49,000 each, so that's £98,000 in total, and still receive their entitlement. And again, this shows the inconsistency of the government approach, and the reason that this House must take, I believe, the time to review this matter and get it right. Our middle class are struggling. They're the ones in every one of our constituencies, including the ministers, represented in this place, working hard, raising their children, trying to give them opportunities in their life, whilst all around them prices have skyrocketed. These are the ones who are discovering how difficult it is to make ends meet, and who realise that they gather their courage to ask for a reasonable pay rise of a couple of £1,000, that most will be lost in tax, and with the missing child benefit, the struggle will continue. They will be no further ahead. They're the ones that our party's 10-minute rule motion are advocating for help and for change. We have determined that there's a minimum amount of people must have to live and to fill the gaps. I cannot, Mr Deputy Speaker, for the life of me, fathom why the only group of people that we don't seek to give a hand up to are the working backbone of the country. The backbone, by the way, of every one of the parties who are here as well. £50,000 is not what it used to be. Some people will say, well, actually, I've only had that. But it's a threshold we're referring to. We know that the value of money has changed, and that is why everyone who would have earned £65,738 in January of 2013, when the charge was introduced, and now earn almost a third more, are still not embraced by the Minister and by the Department. Times have changed, and so too must the child benefit threshold. And I today lay this bill before the House for consideration. I so propose. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This would be the opportunity if anybody wishes